We ask, deep sea divers, what are your horror stories? Well, here's my story. I was diving in a local pond with a group, much more advanced divers, cave divers. I was barely certified at the time. I'm leading the dive as to get used to pressures and responsibilities. They're mentoring me. It is a Texas puddle, visibility 10 feet max. Not too deep, maybe 25 feet. The known horrible visibility makes it impossible to navigate by compass. We follow a line called a string put by other divers. These lines go from one sunken item to another. So, I know I'm about to hit a small sunken boat. Don't remember which one, there's a few similar in a row in the same state of decay. So, I'm the first in the group. I get to the boat and see someone's black army boot sticking up from the inner quarters. Curious thing is, it looks like something new, not like items you'd find on the bottom. Hard to see, too much muck in these water. So, I touch the boot, thinking it is by itself, but it won't lift. Like, it's attached to something heavy. I put my hand further in and feel the leg continuing out to pants, the calf, and I see the second leg now. Shit, with a big letter S. I turn around and show a sign for the emergency I sent to the group behind me. Everyone has a sour face. No one wants to surface, but it's a rule that if someone says up, others in the group must abort, no questions asked. They wanted me to explain with signs why, but what is a diver sign for a cadaver? I feel like I rushed toward the surface even though trying to stay calm and take time. So, we're on the lake surface now. I have this adrenaline rush. I can barely breathe. So, I tell them there's a body down there. I see rolling eyes from everyone once they see I'm serious. A fan bunch, right? So, I describe in detail what I saw. We go down and I don't lead anymore. We make a group search pattern for the line, but once we locate it, we don't know if we should go forward or backwards as there are a number of boats on that line, and who knows which the body is in, and how far we drifted while talking it to the surface. Well, we find all the boats before finding the original one. So, our customary lead goes into the cabin of the boat and we wait. I'd say he was rather courageous at this point. Went right in. Then, he emerges from the cloud of muck and tells us all to surface. So, gluing information together from what we learn later on, turns out police or some agency had a body recovery trainer in the same lake on the same day. When they went to lunch, they stuffed their fully dressed, anatomically correct rubber doll in one of the sunken boats for a few hours for safekeeping. Well, I died a little that day. I dive a lot, several times a week. My area has a lot of theoretically dangerous things. Sharks, barracudas, morays, and stingrays, blue-ringed octopus, cone snails, box jellies, and all sorts of sea snakes, stonefishes and scorpion fishes, venomous catfish, crown of thorn starfish, and various sea urchins that can hurt you in several different ways, titan triggerfish, and so on and so on. But only one thing has ever gotten me. Twice. Are you ready? Clownfish, like Nemo. They are territorial and brave and will get in your face if you're near their enemies. I usually respect their space, but I was distracted watching something else a couple of times, and turns out they will actually bite if you don't leave their space fast enough. I don't have a particular horror story, but the scariest moments are probably when I get caught in strong currents and have to crawl on the bottom to fight it, going hand over hand like I'm climbing a horizontal wall, despite what a lot of people tend to think. Sea critters are not your problem. You leave them alone and it's fine. Sea conditions like waves or currents, and above all, human error, are the real killers. I just remembered an incident that did scare me. It was a human error or equipment failure. When you're diving, you want to ascend to the surface slowly. This is because under pressure, your blood and tissue can hold more gases. And as you ascend to the surface, these dissolved gases have to return to being gases. If you're slow, you just breathe it out as you come up, but if you're too fast, they turn to bubbles of gas in your arteries and veins before they can be vented out. This is known to cause decompression sickness, aka the bends. I was diving with a friend at about 82 feet when this old beat-up BCD, The vest that you can inflate with air to control your buoyancy started to inflate on its own. This has happened to me before as well, but I just disconnected the air hose from the BC immediately and carried on, and went on to do about 10 dives with a busted BC that I only inflated manually. She did not think too quickly of that, or did not have time to. This all happened so quickly. I saw that she was having buoyancy and control issues. She was upside down, kicking, trying to stay down. But in a few seconds it took for me to realize how bad the problem was. She was already at the surface. Basically, I quickly glanced around to see if there was a rock I could use to weigh her down, and when I turned back, she was gone. I followed her up, but not too quickly, and even so, my dive computer was beeping warnings to me. When we met up, I wondered why she did not use her dump valve. There's a valve at the bottom of the BC exactly for releasing air when you're feet up, especially since she was experienced and should have known that. Then, I saw that string you pulled to the valve was missing, so it was literally impossible to dump the air when oriented that way, so check your gear before you use it. I was pretty worried that she would come down with the bends, but she was fine. People are often worried that I dive alone a lot, but honestly, all my scariest and most anxious moments were problems occurring with other divers. My family got certified while I was in high school. Our last dive was open water. We decided we would do it on vacation. All other dives were in states in a pool. It was a wreck dive about 200 yards offshore. Not sure why, but Mom's tank went empty way faster than everyone else's, while we were out at sea. She did not realize until it was below 5%. We surfaced and started swimming back, but she panicked. She was an experienced swimmer and snorkeler, but she could not handle it with other scuba gear. We whistled for help, and the locals thought we were just being tools. Did not realize she was really struggling. We kept her up and got her back. Finally, about 50 yards out, they realized we were towing in a diver in distress. Everything turned out okay. I haven't been scuba diving since. My dive buddy and I bought some equipment from a sergeant on the Air Force Base and we were testing it out. My first clue should have been the fact that this sergeant's dive buddy was his wife, and neither one had an octopus on the rig. Their tanks had a type of valve called a J valve. The way it works is that it normally works until there's about 500 psi in the tank, then shuts off your air. You then push a rod on the back in the tank to reopen it and start your ascent. We descended to the bottom and my buddy headed off. Our dive plan was to follow the edge of a weed bed to a big stump that always had a bunch of fish chilling under it during the day. And then, my regulator stopped giving me air. I'd breathed all the way out, every single molecule gone from my lungs. I went to breathe in, nothing. I tried again, no air. I remembered the J valve and pushed the rod. I felt it chunk into place trying to breathe again. Nothing. I panicked once before my life as a child, and I felt the exact same sensations rising again. It was like there was a small animal in my brain clawing to get out. I had enough presence of mind to pray, "Please, Lord, help me stay calm and get out of this." A sense of calm immediately washed over me. Thoughts flashed through my mind, but not in panic, and as if they did just on instinct. Or divine inspiration. I pulled on that regulator one more time, and I got some air. I tried again, and just a bit more air. I swam to my dive buddy, who realized I was not following, and I signaled no air surfacing. Then I got out of Dodge. That was a Friday. On Saturday, I was in the dive shop. Turned out, a spring in the J valve had failed and closed it prematurely in position where it could not reopen. I got a K valve, the kind that stays on all the time. Monday, I was in the base exchange ordering octopus regs for me and my buddy. And yeah, I never bought used equipment again. My dad was spearfishing and almost lost his hand, scrotum, and leg to a 300-year-old eel. Some quick backstory. Greek islands of Karpanthos 30 years ago, there was a myth of a 323-year-old monster eel. For those that don't know, eels die after they mate, so they live about 7 months. However, if they don't mate, they will live for an eternity and they will just keep growing. And the locals told my dad where it was, and my dad was like, quote, "Yeah, sure, it's just a myth." He dove down in the area where they told him it lived, and after a few dives, he saw a ginormous octopus, and he thought, oh hell yeah, since it was half his height and it was definitely the biggest octopus he's ever caught. He shot at it, went to grab, but it was still alive and latched onto the rocks. So it then grabbed his arm and he couldn't swim up. No air tank, by the way. So now, he had less than a minute of oxygen left and was stuck down at 18 meters. Not that deep, but definitely deep. He took out his knife, slashed between the underneath the eyes of the octopus. He also lifted up the flap of skin containing its brains, and it died after 5 seconds. My dad then proceeds to grab it and starts streaking it onto his belt above his pee. Well, he looked to his left and sees a freaking torpedo of an eel screaming towards him. To describe this eel to you guys is hard, but I'll try my best. Imagine a mouth the size of a human head. That was the mouth of the eel. My dad estimates it was about 8 to 13 inches wide, 7 feet long at least. It swam right up to him, opened its mouth and grabbed onto the octopus, and started thrashing at the octopus. And since it was attached to my dad's belt, there was an eel right next to his testicles, hands, and legs. He unclipped his belt, dropped everything, his gun, his stringer, his float line. He just bolted to the surface. Spent a few minutes at the surface before making sure he had left his gear, and he swam down to get his gun and whatnot. He never went back there again. I'm a long-time scuba diver, instructor and dive master, and ex-commercial diver. I probably have a few horror stories that would make people's hair curl. Diving literally in shit, for example, or helping drag a car with bodies inside out of the river. But actually, the most interesting story happened when I was on holiday in Turkey and diving over there as a tourist. I had a package book with this little Turkish dive operator who ran out of a boat moored up off just an island. The dive masters seemed to be a good bunch, and as with all the places, they took us in for a check dive, which, as an instructor, was a formality. So cue day 2. This little island's maybe 100 meters long and could swim around quite easily. It provides shelter in the lee of the island where the large dive boat is moored up. To get to the dive boat, a small tender picks you up from the beach and we drive across a lagoon. So far, so good. We get kited up on the main boat and then the little tender takes us to a dive site with everything on except fins, mask, and so forth. So we're motoring along, but there's 6 of us sat in this little tender plus the skipper. We get out of the safety of the island shelter and the sea starts getting choppy. We motor on, but progressively something seems to be happening with the boat. Waves are swamping the front and the water's not coming out. The bilge isn't working and the boat's progressively starting to get lower into the water. We're maybe 500 yards from the main boat now. I instinctively grab my fins because I know it's about to happen and shout at my buddy to grab your stuff, which he does. And then the rest follow suit. The engine starts to splutter. I grab my mask and put it on. The boat is sinking. Fast. 10 seconds later, the skipper jumps off the boat and it finally just succumbs to the waves as it disappears under the water, leaving the divers floating with inflated BCDs and the boat slowly sinking to the bottom 10 meters underneath us. My commercial diver kicks in. I say to the skipper, swim back to the boat and ask the captain to send over the tender and some BCDs on it. I knew he didn't have any lift bags. We'll go down and dive it and I'll attach an SMB to it so we know where it's at. Come back and meet me. He nodded and swam off, and the other dive master went off and dove for the group a while, and my buddy dived the wreck of the tender we had just been on. I dropped down to the tender which was leaking fuel and thankfully sat upright in the seagrass at around 10 meters. I sent up my SMB safety sausage and tied it to one of the boards on the deck of the tender. Once we saw the other tender reappear a few minutes later, I slowly ascended with my buddy. We grabbed the BCDs off the chap, and thankfully, I had my dry suit hose attached to my regulator. So we took 4 BCDs down and strategically clipped them off to different parts of the boat. I then, thankfully the same connector, used my dry suit hose to inflate them one at a time and slowly the boat lifted off the grass and made its way to the surface. We tied a rope around the bow and the other tender towed it back to the main boat. Thankfully, I had enough gas left when my buddy and I finished the dive by swimming back to the main dive boat underwater. Suffice to say, I had a few more dives with them, including an amazing night dive experience where the whole sea was fluorescent, and did not pay a thing for that trip. They offered me a job. I declined. I'm a dive master and I've been diving for 23 years now. Pretty much nothing freaks me out at this point, but I've had a few creepy experiences. The worst was actually while free diving near the local harbor. I was just chilling on the surface in fairly low visibility water when I feel something bump into my arm. I look to my side and it's a clear bag bulging with a full animal guts. And of all the things you'd want bumping into you, this is pretty low on the list. I assume it was thrown off a ship. If that bag had popped, it would have probably caused an actual sharknado. We also regularly night dive here. This is South Africa, so it's not sissy tropical diving. Usually low visibility, strong currents, and most of our dives are fairly deep, at about 100 feet. You see some incredibly rare stuff here at night. Another dive master and I ended up being the only divers one night after several cancellations. So we dropped down to the reef, and we were immediately attacked by a shoal of amberjacks. Now, amberjacks are a large, strong, fast fish. They were attracted and confused by our lights, and proceeded to crash into us like fishy cruise missiles from the darkness. My buddy got hit in the head, I got hit in the chest. I had one literally wiggle under my armpit at one point, as if it wasn't weird enough. On our decompression stop, we had a humpback whale extremely close to us. Not in the limited range of our lights, but they were singing so loudly that I could feel my entire chest vibrating. You could just feel they were right there looking at us. It was a creepy dive, especially one with two people out in the inky blackness 3 miles from the shore. This was a story I heard from my dad. He told me. There was once a group of 3 divers. One of them brought along a camera and wanted to take pictures. They were diving in warm tropical water, so just a thin base layer and some beach pants was enough. This diver that brought the camera saw a nudibranch, a small slug-like, very colorful creature. It went down to take a look and was floating just centimeters above the seafloor. Then suddenly, a large stingray emerged right under him, whipped its tail across him, lashing his thighs to its chest. The water turned red as blood bled out from the massive wound. As the 2 other friends were carrying their unconscious friend to the surface, one of them put his hands above his head, resembling a fin. It was a sign for a shark. They pulled out their knives and hoped for the worst. As they wait, and wait, and wait, at 5 meters depth for their safety stop. Miraculously, they all made it to the surface, but sadly, the one struck by a stingray did not make it alive. I was diving off Key West for the first time, and we'd seen some really cool stuff on the boat on the way. Dolphins riding a wave alongside us. We saw a couple sharks, etc. The dive master did warn us that we were diving it was near to a territory of massive hammerhead, but made sure to let us know hammerheads are bottom feeders, not man-eaters. So I had a glorious time with this dive. Saw some incredible stuff. Probably the most amazing part was when I swam by this huge rock to check out this gorgeous angelfish, and suddenly, the rock lifts up off the ground and swims away. The rock had been a loggerhead sea turtle the size of a small car. Okay, exaggeration. He was 4 feet, but when you're that close, they look enormous. And we startled it. Cool thing, my 8-year-old's daughter swam after the turtle, and the turtle was totally okay with it. It did not like the adults, but this small child swimming by it, it actually stopped and looked at her. That was amazing. So the terrifying part was something I have never swam with. I kept getting nervous because while the water was very clear, there was a visibility limit, and there was something out there where it got murky. Something huge, at least 7 to 8 feet, and there were a few of them. Whatever they were, they knew where we were, and they were curious but keeping their distance. Suddenly, in my peripheral vision, one of them comes at me. I did not think it was physically possible for something that massive to move so damn fast. It was so fast it made from the murky edge, probably 40 feet away, to within 1 foot of me, and back to the murk, and I did not even get to see what it was. All I could see was a huge, impossibly fast blur of black and silver. 3 times this happened. They always came to me from behind or on the side, and were gone before I could see what they were. It was scaring the shit out of me. The only way I figured out what the hell they were was when I turned and watched them do it to another diver, and I could actually see them. Mother ducking tarpons. I'd see them from the docks. I'd seen the fishermen catch them, but I've never actually been down in the water with them. They're harmless game fish, but my god, these things are fast. Like, full on. Leaving Barry Allen in the dust. Fast. Really cool fish, but holy shit. I spent a few years diving for the Navy. I've done some pretty deep dives of all kinds and did some underwater welding at one point, which I hated because it's hard to be attentive to everything as is, but when you throw welding into the equation, it's almost too much. The team I was on back in '96 did some time at the Zukili Station down at the Southern Pole. It was our home away from home whenever we were inland, and not usually off of one of our 1K mile away dive assisting with cable installs or repairs. Sometimes, these jobs would take a few weeks or months to do, depending on what specifically we were doing, at what depths, who involved, etc. The deepest we ever went was a little past 1,000 feet, and let me tell you, it's like a different damn planet at that depth. Especially where we were. The place was kind of cold you did not know could exist. The gases you could use give you headache, and the noises you hear are unreal. The South Pole has way more life than you might think, too. I saw some pretty massive sharks. I caught a glimpse once of a 20-foot long great white shark, which made me come close to peeing my pants. But I also saw a few squids that came close to me, making me have a heart attack, and it wasn't for how amazing they appeared at that size. As big as me, and I'm around 6'2". There's tons of fish, jellies, crabs, and as weird as it might sound, there's some coral. Well, coral isn't the right word for it, I guess. Algae? Anemones? Whatever they are. It all looked like ghostly coral, almost entirely transparent, usually about the size of a basketball. Anyways, the place we were working at one week was right next to a huge ridge that had a pretty deep drop-off that went even deeper than we were before. About 1,200 feet or so. We called it the Gorge. It was so huge you couldn't even see the other side of it. It was like a massive void. I was on a team that went in to drill a hole for a series of pylons that our group was installing for RAAF. They never really said what it was for, but I think it had something to do with some of the research networking Zuck used, as one of the strands came from our base. There were only 3 of us that did the actual dive, with 2 on standby and everyone else in commons or ops, which might sound weird, but bear in mind, we have loaders and drilling stations on the job site, which make the work of many turn into the work of few. The work itself wasn't exactly hard, but it wasn't safe by any stretch of the imagination. We always had heavy loads because of the suits and tanks equipments, but we had to operate the machinery we used to make the holes, which can sometimes be the hardest part due to the loss of dexterity you suffer with all that gear and equipment draped over your body. You had to keep a constant eye on the systems and gauges, sensor temperatures, etc. To avoid problems if anything did happen, you have to scurry over to one of the danger stations for whatever you needed after letting your safety partner know, if possible to avoid machinery accidents. Believe it or not, we were pretty good and never had any major issues. Except once, we had a drill shaft practically blow up about 20 different pieces at once. Not sure what it hit, but once we swapped it out, we made it through whatever it was that caused the shift to break. It wasn't a major issue, we just reloaded a different shaft. It happens. We had to swap it out again not long after though, because I think the bit had to crunch through the other bit that was still in the hole. So, I guess I'll be one of the few on here to say an actual scary monster story. Because one night, We were down there doing our thing, and one of the 20 feet tall job site lights we used to keep our area lighted was tipped over, and I'm not sure what did it. These things weigh about 250 pounds and are operated like one of those one-man lifts or buggies that you step onto to control like a mini excavator. You can't rent from Home Depot. We were all operating the drill site when it happened, and the falling light was caught by our attention. By the time we saw it, it landed on the seafloor. We shut the drill off and stood motionless, trying to gauge what happened and just listen for anything. I think we were all shocked because none of us moved a muscle for a few minutes. After standing there, we're looking around trying to shine out our helmet spotters toward the down light pole area, and then we heard a noise from the opposite area behind the still standing light poles over the gorge and at least 40 yards away from our site. I think it's really hard to gauge distance underwater, especially when your balls are freezing and you can't see anything past the lighting you had at that depth. I'll never forget what it sounded like too. I have no idea if the noise is what tipped over the pole after that. We never saw or heard anything like what happened, but we were all still a little shook up over it. My buddy saying he came close to dropping his weights. As soon as we were all topside, we told our captain what we saw and heard. He just laughed at us and said we need to check our gases next time, but he stopped laughing once I showed him some captures of the tip light pole. As crazy as it sounds, I miss doing that stuff. Diving the day before a hurricane on a small South Pacific island. Out of nowhere, a black and white sea snake, venomous, wrapped itself around my arm. Apparently, this happens from time to time before major storms. They can sense it and look for things that are heading towards the shore, so they don't have to put in much effort to get out of sea. As soon as I was in the shallows, it uncurled and headed back to the beach, where it hid underneath the breadfruit tree. I thought I was going to get bitten to death by a snake at sea. Turns out, I was just a taxi service for a very calm but rather rushed reptile. That's going to bring these stories of deep-sea diving nightmares to an end. On Midnight Monster, we cover all sorts of spooky and unexplained topics. If that sounds like something you're into, make sure to subscribe to the channel and check out the other videos. I'll see you in the next mystery.